I'm going to show you proof that ChatGPT is killing your brain. An MIT study, MIT, not some random internet poll. The study didn't just say, oh, ChatGPT gave wrong answers. It says the whole vibe of using ChatGPT messed with people's thinking, as in weak memory, lazy habits, poorer decision making, a measurable drop in creativity. Oh my god. Not to be dramatic, but giving a brain rot. Not in a metaphorical way, literally. Electrodes on your skull, lab coat, MIT scientist proof. They compared people who wrote essays using ChatGPT versus those don't and tested their brain memories and psychology. Now, before you panic delete your OpenAI account, let me make this clear. This study, as shocking as it sounds, isn't perfect. The sample size is small. The design is flawed, probably due to the same reason every university project cuts corners, budget and time, and many other issues that are affecting the results. But the conclusion is still dangerous if you don't pay attention, because this might be the beginning of something way bigger than we think. This is Rishu PhD. Today I have a guest speaker, Ahmad Nazzal, a medical doctor and neuroscientist who is focusing on AI in clinical practice and education. We will walk you through the actual study step by step, where it hits, where it is limited, how we should be using AI for research work, learning, and writing. I'm gonna show you the right way to use ChatGPT, one trick that actually makes your brain think harder while using AI. This could change the way you learn. So let's talk about the limitations stated in the article by the authors. The researchers say it best themselves. We hope this study serves as a preliminary guide to understanding the cognitive and practical impacts of AI on learning environments. Not the final answer, just the first brave one. Admitted that, especially since they had 54 participants total and only 18 people finished the most important session, session 4, the big plot twist, where people switch tools. 18 is a small sample size for drawing strong scientific conclusions. That's why we're not throwing big statistical punches here. Instead, we're gently tossing out lightweight results and hoping they hit something meaningful, knowing full well that they might not. Alright, so it's time to throw my own critical and harsh opinions about how the study should be conducted and how I would design the study, assuming that we have enough money and abundant time to analyze the data, flipping it over and over again. Ready? The LLM group of students were forced to use one fixed version of ChatGPT with locked settings. I love ChatGPT, but let's be real. Sometimes it flops. Like sometimes I open it and it's just vibing in a dumb zone. So I'd have to plan all the activities not using ChatGPT on this day. I just close the tab and walk away. You can't force me to use that and call it a fair test. It's not stable and it's moody. Real ChatGPT users do not just sit down, ask one question, and accept the answer like we're reading a fortune cookie. I open 5 tabs, I tweak prompts, I ask follow-ups, I check the links and sources. I'm out here doing mental gymnastics and verifying every study ChatGPT mentions. I go full researcher mode, and this study only gave the participants 20 minutes. Definitely not enough for me to dig into something interesting. What you need to do is stretch it into a full hour. Let people warm up. Encourage them to ask follow-ups. Let them change their mind. That's why it's called ChatGPT, not a pop quiz GPT or Oracle GPT. It was built for conversation, back and forth, a whole dialogue. Dare I say, a journey. If someone pieces out after one question, that's like texting your therapist one sentence and expecting emotional healing. You clarify, you compare, you evolve your thoughts. Again, you want to know how ChatGPT affects thinking? Then let's give people enough time to think. Now, speaking of being interesting, I'd have to mention that task relevance is important because they had techie MIT students writing about who knows what. The kind where you're asked if art can change lives or if loyalty requires criticism. Beautiful questions, but not everyone connects with them, especially under pressure. Some people just didn't vibe with the topic and you can't tell in their writing and effort. Because newsflash, cognitive effort goes up when people are actually interested. If it were me, let me write about AI or a novel medical device or drug delivery, I will give you fire. But if I don't care, I'm copying ChatGPT and going to bed. For the study, I'd divide participants by interest clusters: philosophy babes, science kings, tech bros, humanity nerds, and tailored prompts that match their vibe. You want authentic effort where you can measure how much people would use their brain cells for? Start with curiosity. Speaking of the participants, they are using only college students, who are one of the most sleep-deprived, assignment-overloaded, caffeine-saturated species on Earth. They're not thinking, they're surviving. So, of course, they are gonna copy-paste something from ChatGPT in 20 minutes and call it a day. Give me the grade. I gonna go cry in my dorm. So maybe don't generalize these results to adults with mortgages and opinions. That's why I would like to redesign this study like this. Let people screen record and a camera facing the draft paper on the desk so we can see how they write. When they flip between sources, how they think, not just submit essay, analyze with some brain scan, and buy. Doing the full recording will allow you to track what people actually do when thinking with ChatGPT. Capture every frustrated sigh, every deleted prompt, every, that's interesting, that's the juicy stuff. And from that, you can group participants by usage style, like the explorers, who ask a million things, the skeptics, who double-check everything, like me, the copy-pasters, we see you, the rewriters, who just use it as a rough base. And there's also the time constraints and the working rule constraints. Especially, they don't allow ChatGPT users to check any other sources. If you lock the tool and limit the time and force the topic, then of course the AI looks bad. So yes, thank you for your neuroimaging and your linguistic clustering, but this conclusion is not applicable to most real-world scenarios. Not until you let participants actually engage the way real humans use AI. Let them be curious, let them push back, let them explore. Allow them open different websites so they're encouraged for long back and forth and switch strategies midway. Because if you don't, then all you are really testing may be how lazy people get when you make them do something boring under a time limit with tools they can't control. And that may turn out to be just bad user interface. The authors actually mentioned that our findings are context dependent and are focused on writing an essay in an educational setting and may not generalize across tasks. They know that a little bit of change can make the difference. They also mentioned that we did not divide our essay writing task into subtasks, like idea generation, writing, and so on. This labeling can be useful to understand what happens at each stage of essay writing and have more in-depth analysis. And in the interview process after the test, ask the participants what they felt useful. Ask what confused them. Ask how much they trusted the results. Ask whether they would do it again. Because cognitive offloading isn't about how much work you did. It's about how you decided what work you do. Personally, that's the study I would fund or I would read, and that's the study we need. Alright, let's ask our neuroscientist guest about the study. Hey Ahmad, what do you think? What is your take on this study?
Hi Ree, and thank you so much for the invitation to comment on this study. And to be able to help you, I need to put on my thinking cap. I think this study is really an interesting study, and it is hugely taken out of context and misunderstood. So my take on it. So first of all, the paper is still a preprint, so it is published online but still not peer-reviewed, which means that it needs to go through the peer-reviewing process, which is like experts, other scientists in the field need to read it, comment on it, before it gets published in what we call peer-reviewed journals. So the results are still at a very early stage, and the authors will sure take all the feedback that they got from everyone and from the reviewers themselves before publishing it. The second point, and as you mentioned, this study focuses on writing only. Writing with ChatGPT and writing without ChatGPT, and actually they have a third condition, which is writing using search engines like Google. And the other thing, that it was done in a small group of participants, so the statistical power for it is still limited, and in a very specific group of participants, which are college students. And we know that everyone is using ChatGPT right now, means that their results do not generalize to the whole population. So we cannot say, okay, it applies to everyone else on all the tasks that we are using ChatGPT or other large language models for. So let me dig a little bit deeper, and let me start by reading something from the paper. So it says, our findings offer an interesting glimpse into how large language model assisted versus unassisted writing engage the brain differently, which is actually not that surprising. I mean, it's like saying, okay, we compared someone who's really writing to someone who's just reading. I mean, if you think about what you're doing when you're using ChatGPT for writing, you're actually reading its output and not really writing it. And it's not surprising to expect that the brain activity will look different. Maybe one way of looking at the results or trying to understand it would be as, okay, how would writing activity differ from reading, right? So I think this is interesting to look at, and I'm not sure that they were able to disentangle those two very important components. Like, is the one who was using ChatGPT is actually engaging the brain in a similar way that like someone who would be just reading a text and not writing the text? So that would be interesting to look at. And I guess the reason why everyone got confused and the results were hugely like inflated or misunderstood is the formulation used in the study itself. In summary, writing an essay without assistance, brain-only group led to stronger neural connectivity across all frequency bands measures. So just use terminology for the non-trained individual who's not a scientist, not trained in neuroscience, just stronger neural connectivity. That gives the impression that something is better happening in the brain, but that is not really what's going on, and that's not what they're trying to convey. It simply says, okay, comparing those two experimental conditions, one was bigger, one was stronger, one had more increase compared to the other. That does not per se it is better. One way of looking at it when you say stronger neural connectivity is that maybe the brain was really putting more effort. Maybe the brain was working harder when it was doing this specific experimental condition. And working harder, does it really translate to learning better? Well, sometimes it does, but not always, and we have to test for. So that being said, I think it is a really, really interesting study that is trying to answer a really complicated and very important question. I mean, with all the feedbacks, with all the resonance that this and impact that this paper got, even at the preprint stage, I think people are hungry for the more information on how large language models change the way our brain works. And we will probably see more results. We will probably see more studies getting into that, and that is really exciting. So finally, and as a take-home message, this study does not mean that ChatGPT will turn you dumb, stupid, brain dead, brain rot, or turn you into a zombie.
Wow. Thanks so much, Ahmad, for your input. There are quite some points that I didn't think of. It's a great video definitely for our audiences. Make sure to check the course ChatGPT for Medical Doctors and the Neuroscience for Kids activity book series from Ahmad. I will leave links to his social and websites in the description. Alright, now let's come to the prompting technique, whereby you actually improves your critical thinking and attention to detail if you use them correctly. So here is the one tip. You upload the PDF directly into the chat. Well, you can choose ChatGPT, or I think DeepSeek can do something like that too, but for now, I love ChatGPT because it's easier and smoother for me to ask critical thinking questions. And that's important because you can formulate your angles different ways and it needs nuances. And in order to capture the nuances of your thinking, your thoughts, your questions, you need a tool that's extremely good at language. And from a lot of people's feedback, that's ChatGPT for now. After uploading, you can ask something like, do you think this study has flaws in the study design or in how the data was analyzed? So instead of spending 30 to 40 minutes reading the entire paper from top to bottom, taking notes, structuring your thoughts, and only then forming questions, you can flip the process this way. It's like ChatGPT is your junior assistant. It can give you a valuable, I already read it, and here's what I noticed report. You don't replace your critical thinking, you kickstart it. And that's what makes it so powerful for analysis and even content creation. It doesn't mean you use it as your final fact-checking tool, of course not. You still need to verify things yourself, but it's a thinking tool that it gives you a jump start. That kind of question usually generates a lot of insightful feedback and ideas, even things you might not have noticed at first glance. This is Rishu, PhD. Feel free to comment or email me with your questions. I'd love to explore them in future instructional videos. Like and subscribe. I'll try my best, promise.